Hello everyone and welcome to another Stoneridge Confab. What a fantastic week it has been, and it's been pretty busy, and I'm looking forward today to going over some more content, obviously in our AI track here. I'm going to go ahead and bring down the volume just a little bit more, but that should be perfect. Awesome. Rob, good morning as well to you, sir. Happy Thursday to all. I should say good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Probably different people in different regions will be watching this, so it should be a lot of fun to kind of go through this content. So I'll just do a quick introduction and we'll start rolling here, obviously, on the content. Basically, high level, welcome to a Stoneridge Confab. Confab is basically a place where we go and live stream really all the different Microsoft technologies and how we use those to support businesses in the Stoneridge family, basically. We've started this about 2.5, almost 3 years ago now. I think Carly and the marketing team can keep me honest. But the net result is that we basically kind of demystify technology to a point where it's not all about the marketing message or the sales message around it. It's about the reality of how we can use these technologies to address those needs really in the business. So should be a lot of fun to go through this. AI has been a bigger focus for me and my team and everyone at Stoneridge. And what's been really interesting about it revolves around the fact that we're starting to see some really cool use cases that are coming out of this. And it's actually, in my mind, a really positive thing, because it's been one of those issues that we've had where everyone's saying it's a problem or a solution looking for a problem per se. And there's just been a lot of learning, I guess, that we've gone through at Stoneridge, that I've gone through personally, that help us really understand how to use this tool. And I think that that's the key thing or key message that I want to relate on Confab here today, is that this tool isn't designed to answer everything. It's a tool like a hammer versus a square. There's different types of purposes for those tools. But what we want to do is we want to find the right use for that tool. And I will tell you, with AI, we're starting to see more and more of that, really as we go through implementation processes, as we find other use cases that are related to it, and as the maturity of these models increase in terms of what those capabilities are. What we have inside of our applications has made this even more exciting because of the openness of the API architecture that we started with. We just have so much more that we can do with it now, right? So today, what we're going to do is hopefully put me out of a job. I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek, but candidly, these are some of the conversations that partners, that anyone that's a customer, that leaders inside of the business system space should be having a conversation around. And it's not about, obviously, the replacement of humans. It's about the assistance of humans in being able to do our jobs faster and easier and better, right? So that's really the theme I want to kind of tackle, because once again, I mean, to our team, they've heard me say this many, many times. Pandora's box is open. We're not putting everything back into the box. There's no way that these large language models are not going to improve over time. Maybe they don't improve at the speed that the shareholders want or the speed that businesses want immediately. But the reality is that the neural network type technology that drives large language models, really with scale and growth, are going to become better. And maybe they're not going to be 20 or 30% or 50% better with each iteration. Maybe they'll be, the next iteration will be 20% better. But the point is that the tooling that's used for this to use AI and automation obviously is going to be there moving forward. And with Microsoft saying that this is a 15-year play on it, you as business leaders and as people that are joining this confab should really take that to heart, knowing that this investment is going to increase. And there may even be other technologies that are introduced that make it, for example, where we don't need scale to train these models to make them better. Maybe we find a different algorithm on quick learning or a different type of learning that we can apply. So once again, this is not going anywhere, and I'm really looking forward here today to showing some of those use cases, right? So yeah, Rob, you kind of don't steal all my thunder right away in the chat here that we got. Replace yourself with an agent. We are going to be going through agents today a little bit more within Copilot Studio. We know for a fact that we're getting the automated agents, right, that are going to be coming out pretty soon as well, especially after the Ignite event that's coming up, or might be going on right now. I don't know, to be honest. I think it might be going on. But the net result of this is that we're going to start seeing more and more of these AI type capabilities ingrained into really the application. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to step back and use AI not just in the application, but as a support system, basically, to go through and assist really with an implementation of like Business Central as an example. Last week, we at Stoneridge hosted what we call our Leadership Summit. And that was a really fun event. There were a ton of people that were at the event. And I remember last year with a bunch of the leaders that were there for bigger organizations and also for small, when I asked how many people were using Copilot or even ChatGPT or any large language model, it was kind of crickets. It was like I got like maybe one hand that kind of went up, and they were like they're on the data and governance side of it to make sure that they had the security, the architecture, because we all know security through obscurity is not a concept anymore with AI because it can access basically anything instantly. But the net result is that there weren't that many people that raised their hand. At this event, we had a ton of leaders that raised their hand. And it was really interesting to see all the different use cases that they shared and where I see there's so much more potential for these use cases to get better, to get more refined, to become more accurate, and to save time. And that was the key message I had for leaders that were at that event. Do not look at AI as the accuracy pivotal moment inside of your organization. That's not the intent of AI at this point. Maybe in the future we'll start seeing more of that, right? And what do I mean by that? Because I'm going to unload this a little bit so you can kind of understand, at least at a high level, why I'm saying this. Look at AI as a speed increaser for what you're doing. And that I think is the biggest problem that the industry has had when it comes to the alignment of the capabilities and expectations of those capabilities versus the reality, which is why we get into some of that negative sentiment that's out there as well around AI, where it can't solve anything and it can't address it. Well, the truth of the matter is that we don't know how to use it. We don't have the right tooling and architecture to do that to start. It's only been a year, year and a half, 2 years, technically a year and a half since the public GA version came out for Copilot. Like we're at the very beginning of a whole new concept in how to interact with machines. And just like computers went from punch cards to then assembly to then, going up even further beyond that then to languages that can be interpretive languages, right? Where we can use C, where we can use C++, and then we move into even the fourth generation languages where we start looking at like Visual Basic and C# that even abstracted even more. We're at this binary punch card level with AI when it comes to us using it in a business system. We've had machine learning algorithms that can help us with statistics and things of that nature, but if you really look at where we're at, like we're at the very beginning of this, and what we can do at the beginning here with the investment that has occurred is pretty amazing. And I think a lot of people just don't give it enough credit. Now, that doesn't matter. I get it. In business, it is about money and dollars, right? That's typically what we're talking about. We're talking about being able to make revenue and profitability off of that revenue, obviously. So that means that the cost of what we're talking about for a technology shouldn't impact that. It should ideally, in the longer term play with it, help us with that revenue and then increase that profitability by introducing automation as a part of it. And so that's been a problem in business, right? Where people are chasing that carrot. Well, let's not chase the carrot. Let's use it for what it really can be used for. And I guess the biggest thing I can say with this would be start looking at AI systems as conversational, number one, to start, as not fully accurate, but can help you with speed to get your job done. And you are still, once again, the pilot. And this is why we call it Copilot and why we don't call it Pilot, right? Because what Copilot is doing is it's assisting you really as you go through those different types of steps and processes to ensure that you are accurate as much as possible, or it's generating content and it's easier for you to review it. There's just many use cases for those scenarios that you could apply generally inside of your environment. You don't need software or have it integrated with software to get those types of jobs done. And candidly, the example that I gave then at the Leadership Summit was showing, for example, taking a 5,000 page RFI or RFP, throwing it into Copilot, and having it answer all of those different types of questions that are there based off of the Business Central or whatever application that I'm selling at that point its capabilities going into basically those questions and those responses. And something that would take me 8 hours then takes me 30 minutes. That's a huge savings, right? And that's where I want people to start thinking about how they can use AI systems. Because once again, if you're going for the accuracy, you're probably going to be disappointed. And the only other thing I like to say with that, this is the funny thing about it, and sometimes I think I'm a little bit crazy thinking this way, and maybe that is true. But think about it this way. We design a whole system that we say acts like human brains. Neural networks, weights and bases, with the encoding algorithms that occur, they're trying to figure out in the brain what encoding algorithms we do for sight, for sound, you name it, right? That's a big mathematical theory that could help with all these other types of systems. That being said, then, if you talk to 5 people about an answer with something, even 5 experts, you could get 5 varying answers to that question, right? I like to always joke, ask a developer, to solve a problem, you'll get 5 solutions, and ask 10 developers, and you'll get like 5,000, right? There's just lots of different options that are out there to be able to address things. So factually backed information is something you just have to be kind of cautious around. But automation is cheap and repeatable. And typically, automation doesn't require decision points that are as complex as what people are trying to use it for, which is tell me how to start a business. It's like, well, we're not talking about AGI, artificial general intelligence, where we have artificial-based systems that are as smart as a human. We're not there yet, right? So I always look at it then as AI is a 6-year-old. How do you tell a 6-year-old or 7-year-old to get from task A to task Z, right? And if you take a prompt and you prompt them without any information, any guidance, any framing, any background information, the prompt output that you're going to get, the garbage in, as I call it, you're going to get garbage out. You're not going to get the anticipated result that you want. So this concept of using AI systems to increase speed, like I said, has been a very beneficial perspective for our customers and really for a lot of the AI in general. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and just read some of the comments just really quick. And what we're going to do is we're going to start using AI to help us go through an implementation process. And we're going to use Copilot Studio to start, but candidly, I think I use candidly a lot because I like that to be like, here's an inner monologue, inner secret that Scott Frappier is kind of saying. The models, you could use any of them, right? So you could use Llama, which is by Meta, for example. You could use Google's Gemini, for example, as well. And all of them have varying capabilities and varying levels of integration and varying API stacks, right, that you can use for that. I guess my biggest thing I'd like to say would be right now we know that OpenAI's models are pretty much at the forefront. GPT-4, for example, even Google's Gemini, the 405 billion that they came out with in terms of the different types of connections that are there that can be made then in the inference model, didn't beat GPT-4. And that's even a year or two earlier, right, in terms of when that was produced. So we know that Microsoft uses then the OpenAI model to basically then drive Copilot inside of the Microsoft stack. And so we, in my opinion, at this point, do have one of the best, most robust models that are out there. But remember, the patterns I'm going to teach you today are patterns that we're going to see with any competitor as well. And that's going to be a good thing longer term for AI as companies invest more and more to really break through to make it so that these systems can be more useful inside of businesses. And case in point, in the graphics industry, we've seen this happen. We've seen also the negative effect that occurs with this, where all of a sudden now you've got people that went to college for graphic artists, and you know what they usually start at when they go to a company that's a big design house. Typically, they're working with clients on proof of concept at a lower level that then the major artists then use as different design concepts to then create that finished work of art. Well, a lot of customers now are coming with already preconceived notions that have been generated through AI as to what they want something to look like. And what has that caused? Well, it's caused a big issue for the graphics industry because they can't find as much work then for these individuals that are growing into that career. And so that's also why we've got a lot of in the arts, especially, a lot of negativity around AI because it's not creative, it's not original, it's reusing, for example, existing patterns that were already there. And I don't entirely disagree with that. But what I will say is that in the business system space, we could see that as well if we don't do a good job of being stewards of how we use these technologies to make people go faster. Because here's the thing about it, we're going to have a labor shortage at some point here. We know the baby boom and what happened with it, and we've seen the statistic with it. I don't know if it's going to be the collapse of society, but I will tell you that we're going to have automation needs from a business perspective no matter what. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in. Let's get off of the bandwagon of the negativity with it, and let's focus on what can we do now to really then assist with an implementation process. So the way I like to frame this is that we're going to start basically with we're going to pretend that Scott Frappier Inc. I'm solo. I don't have enough time to basically manage my legal, my company type operations, my, development that I do, for example, for customers, because maybe I'm an implementer, right? Type of a thing. But I just don't have enough capacity to do that. So what I want to do is I want to start making different types of systems then that help it so that, for example, when I go through an implementation, instead of them pinging me right away, I want them to go somewhere where they can get the information to possibly address the issue without talking to me, right? And it's not that I don't want to talk to that individual, but what I want to do is I want to have a first line of defense that I can direct them to, that then after that first line of defense works or doesn't work, I can then get engaged because then I would then be able to maybe tackle a more complex scenario, right? And that's something that, we should all be thinking about when we look at AI-based systems. How can we use them to address medial tasks that are repetitive and so small and frustrating that it's like it's taking away from that grand vision of where maybe you are going with it. And in an implementation, we always know we need first line support even after go live. Well, why wouldn't we train as part of our implementation process, for example, how to use these technologies to get the answers? Now, one final note with this, I always preface this because this goes to the accuracy effect with it. Don't expect the output to be entirely accurate, but if it gets you 80% of the way there, are you creative enough for that 20% that's left with it? That's my first challenge to you. And then the second is, if you don't know, people are still here to help, right? AI doesn't replace people. It's supposed to make us go faster. So reach out to a person. Reach out to me then, or reach out to your company, for example, that might be assisting you with it to maybe give you more pointed examples on the experience of using Business Central, for example, in a manufacturer versus distributor and what the differences are typically with it that maybe these models can't answer yet at this point, right? That's going to be the balance that you're going to have to figure out as you go through your implementation process on what you can use and set up and configure and not get stuck with it per se versus what you can do and not worry about it, right? And that balance is maybe where you then still involve, for example, a company on the path and decisions that you're going to be making so that input can be given. But at the same point then, it's a business process. You have answers come out of AI, you go through a business process to validate them, you then determine pathing with it. Maybe you're adding a little bit more overhead than into your process, right? But as the models get better, once again, it'll become more accurate. And then also, it's probably still going to be faster even with that validation step that you have incorporated into it, right? So just know that that's the way you should be thinking in my mind with it. So let's go through just a couple of these real quick. Rob said, good morning. Excited to see about AI and me. I know it's going to be kind of fun, right, to go through that. All the geeky deliciousness. Yeah, and Carly, you nailed it, right? Started in 2020. Yep, that's about right. So it's been going on here for a while. Then Rob wants me to replace myself with an agent, which we're going to be doing. And then obviously we've got Clyde. We with AI can back out of our talent out of projects and access more of the brain by remote control. Nailed it, Clyde, right? This is assistive, and that's really what we want to kind of convey here today as we go through this. All right, so monologuing done. Let's go ahead and go into basically our environment here. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over. All right. I may have to adjust the screen a little bit, team, as we go through this. So we will see you'll have a black screen on here. And let's go ahead and bring in my browser. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to create just really quickly a bot online that's going to allow me to ask questions of Business Central, right? And what I want this to do is I want it to basically I basically want it to be accessible in multiple areas. So let's say I'm using Teams. I may want to have it in Teams as an example. I may want to have that on a website. I may want to have that look at a knowledge repository that I've been accumulating as a part of this process as well. There's just a lot of different things, right, that I may want to do with it. And to do that in code, like when the first large language models came out, you'd have to go into Python or R script or whatever it is, and then you'd have to figure out like how do I load it, the inference into memory, and then how do I make it so I can access through an API layer. Like we don't have to worry about that. We have now end user based tools that are going to assist with our creation of this agent that we will use to help us in our implementation process, right? And so key thing here is that we then also have the ability to even go further beyond just the basic agent, because I'm going to create a basic agent to start, but then we're going to look at topics, pathing, generative AI, all using Copilot Studio to really then address those issues or those topics that we may have inside of a business. So with that, let's go ahead and hop over into Copilot Studio to start this conversation. If you haven't done it yet, I'd recommend that you do. Go ahead and sign up at least at a dev level, right, for Copilot Studio. You can see here that it's going ahead and loading up for me in the background. I can guarantee that there's lots of people that are using more and more of this every single day. So speed-wise, it's always fun to be in demo environments and preview environments when we're doing this. So just once again on Confab, it isn't a demo until we break something. But we can see it's basically loading up Microsoft Copilot Studio here for us to use. Now, if you've been living under a rock for a while, just know that Copilot Studio really is the successor to the predecessor called Power Virtual Agents, where we are continuing basically to use these agents and in the future autonomous agents to basically drive businesses and address these different types of needs that we have. So the first thing I want to kind of highlight here is the fact that if I click on my home icon and let's go into one of our environments, let's go into our sales finance environment that I have set up here. In these environments, this is where we can basically go through and then define, for example, really what we want this agent to do, right? And so I've got a couple that are in here that you can see already. So if I go ahead and click on my agents as an example, I've got a bunch of different agents that I've actually gone through and created that I use pretty much all the time. You can't see, I'll move because my mug is in the way, but if I go down here, we also then have our copilots that are from Microsoft, such as Copilot for Sales or Dynamics 360 or Microsoft 365 or customer service as well, right? And one of the things that you're probably seeing here is the branding is starting to get a little bit more accurate. Copilot for Microsoft, Copilot for Sales, Copilot in Dynamics, right? So we're going to see more and more of these copilots. And here's kind of the fact of the matter. Eventually, Microsoft wants to have a copilot for every single person that's out there. Imagine your own assistant, every single person on the planet having the ability to have an assistant that could help them get more done. That's the goal of what Microsoft is really pushing for. And because of that, we need to be able to create an environment and capability to create agents that are easy for end users to create, right? So that's going to be the focus that Microsoft has here for the upcoming years, is to probably more than likely start more on the departmental and the application side of it, but then to increase the capability of these models and decrease the scale requirement for them, so that way we can use more and more of this automation. You can almost look at it as the long-term eventuality of a large language model probably will be what we classify as our 5th to 6th level programming languages in the industry, where you can use a large language model with natural language to create code that machines can run. Like that, I don't see that as a big stretch anymore at this point because, candidly, I use it. I use it to generate code quickly for repetitive tasks that I don't need. Or if I have a concept with something and I want to see an example in AL, in C++, in C Sharp, heck, I even used it in Wise cameras to make scripts on my hacked Wise cameras to basically go through and make sure that the DHCP address was released to get a static IP address, all using bash scripting. And I created that entirely using AI. And I did it just to see if it could do it, and it did it. And it accomplished the goal, and it was faster than me trying to learn the scripting, syntax, format, conditionals. It basically gave me the examples, and with my existing knowledge, I was able to harness that and then improve off of it. So these agents are a concept then that you can use even now as you go through, obviously, your implementation process. Well, how would you then do that? Well, the agent is the first part of it, right? The agent defines, for example, the topics and how it's going to react, and then where it's published or accessible to be able to interact with it. So to create an agent, it's actually a pretty easy proposition now. So let's go ahead and do that, right? I'm going to go ahead and click on my new agent icon or action inside of our Copilot Studio, and would you look at this? It has a welcome to me. Hello, I'm here to help you build an agent so you can get more done. You can say something like provide best practices for project management. I don't know if Heike is on here right now. Or help my teammates to onboard to a new project. What would you like to make? Well, sheesh, this is a really good one, right? So let's go ahead and put in our prompt. And what I'm going to do, team, just really quickly here, let's go ahead and take my speaker, and I'm going to move myself over here so that way you guys can see a little bit more as we're going through the prompting. There we go. All right, so let's go ahead and go through. What would I like you to make? Well, let's pretend Business Central. That's the one I've been harping on because I know the Business Central solution really well. It was the first business system that I really got involved with. I remember accidentally the very first time I opened the Navision product up, it was version 2.01a at what we called LR data back in the day. And I remember going to a field and I was going to search and I typed over the field and tabbed off of it and it saved the data. That was the first time I've ever seen an instant save, so to speak, in a business system. So either way, I want to then take that because I've got a lot of knowledge about Business Central, and I want to use that, for example, to be my implementation helper. So not my support desk, but my implementation helper, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So I want to create an agent that will provide implementation and functional experience revolving around the Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central application. This agent should be able to provide insights on how I implement the solution along with any functional capabilities that are inquired upon, right? So that's what we're making. So basically, I want to have a bot that I create where I can use it to go through more conversation around this to identify, for example, what functional capabilities are there and then what should I be doing in an implementation process. Because I'm going to pretend in this situation that I'm a customer that's buying Business Central. And like I said, some of the implementations of this, they're not expensive per se, because if you look at the labor is the labor. It's like building a house. But at the same point, maybe you don't have access to that type of capital, right? But you want to use a business system that you're going to grow into potentially as well in the future. So this is an option. And you can remember, once again, this isn't to blanketly replace. It's to say, what can you use to go faster, to get your information so that you can control your destiny? This is just an example of that, right? So I'm going to go ahead and click on the send action to send it along here. And then what we're going to see here just really quickly is that the agent is going to go ahead and figure out some of those details. Now, some of the things that are interesting about this within Copilot, a lot of people look at it when we get our first error, they give up, right? And I find this very ironic. People that are getting into AI, they get the first error message that says, oh, it's busy or something else like that. And then they throw their hands up and they're like, oh my gosh, this is the worst thing ever. But you get an error message in a business system, and I've been many times where I'll go over to them, they're still trying to post it as the error message continues to pop out. I just find that kind of ironic, to be quite honest. But the net result here is that sometimes when you even use, for example, this screen, you may get a message that says, hey, timed out, something of that nature occurred with it. Well, copy paste your prior prompt, put it in, and then go from there, right? So we're working through smaller of these inconvenience type issues on the platform that every single company is looking at right now. But the net result is that don't give up if you get a little bit of a prompt that's an error message. That's just my advice to you as you go through this. All right, so great. The agent is now set up to provide implementation functional experience for Business Central. How do we add it? Add a name. Dynamics 365 Expert? No, I don't want that. No. Let's name the agent Dynamics 365 Business Central Implementation Helper. I want to see if I've got any string limits here as well. All right, so we're going to name it different than what it said. I don't want to be Dynamics 365 Expert because we're focusing on just Business Central. All right, so great, it accepted that fact. So now let's refine the instructions further. What should be emphasized or avoided in the agent's responses? So an agent, if you think about it, is something that is going to take a prompt that you have and then send it to the large language model. And that large language model fires off all of its different neurons, whatever you want to call them, weights and bases inside of their encoding to basically come back then with an answer, right? That word calculator concept that's there. But when we send that prompt over to that AI system, we want to have additional information in the context of it, kind of like I was describing with that 6-year-old, where we can say, every time I have a prompt, I want X, Y, and Z to be a part of that prompt as well. So here are some of the things that I have learned as I've gone through the use of AI to make it so that I can get answers that are better. They're not 100% accurate, but there's a noticeable difference between when I use these types of prompts and when I don't use these prompts in my pre-prompt processor. Don't know exactly why yet. I've got theories as to why with it from a more of a biology perspective with it, because if the neural networks are acting at all like our brains do to a degree, the weights and bases that occur when those neurons fire, you need to be able to access them. You need to be able to basically send enough data for that encoding to basically then reach or branch out to those areas that have that information, right? Because a neural network, as we've seen in AI and why they say it's so mysterious, is because they didn't really understand all of that weights and basis and how the encoding occurred. Now we have more and more tools that are helping us with that to be able to analyze that. But if you're looking at 405 billion neurons to figure out how it fired, well, that's quite a bit of information. Or the inverse of it is, why didn't it fire in that area, for example, because that prompt or that processor, preprocessor prompt didn't have that information. So what I'm doing here is I'm basically then putting information that's going to be used with subsequent prompts so that it knows how to behave as it goes through this conversation. So here's what I typically use then with it. I would like your responses to be truthful and we'll do truthful and casual. Okay, so why do I put truthful inside of there? So this is kind of interesting, and I think that this truthful will actually have a bigger impact in large language models in the future, especially when we start thinking about what we call chain of thought inside of large language models. So truthful basically means, from an AI perspective, that I want you to validate the statistical fact behind the answer, right? And if you don't say that, for example, you're not explicitly telling it that you do not want hearsay or you do not want non-factual information, for example, right? So using some of these prompts helps you understand a little bit more then in terms of what that expected output is going to be then from that large language model. And what's interesting about this is that I have done this in, for example, responses that we have done inside of RFPs. And when I do truthful, it is more accurate than if I don't have the truthful statement in for the same exact prompt that I put out there. So these words have an impact then on how the large language model is going to go through and process with that. The other things I like to say, I would like you to include as much factual information as possible with business, if I can spell it, business examples for that prompt that could help aid the end user with the understanding of the question that they are asking, right? Because I don't want just this AI thing to be, great, truthful, and casual, but I want you to do more. I don't want to have that one little paragraph. I want lots of information, but I want that to be as factual as possible, right, as we go through it. Now, longer term, like I said, when we go to chain of thought, what happens is these can actually be used in the chain of thought processing where it goes back to that truthful or casual and it evaluates its response and it says, oh no, that wasn't truthful or casual, go redo it and identify why it wasn't truthful, for example, right? Like these are different things then inside of prompts that will help longer term with this. So what I can do here then after I've gone through and done whatever other pre-processing I have, please make sure to answer any question as well, even if it does not pertain to Business Central. So I'm going to try this. I've not done this before, and so this is the fun thing about Confab is we get to experiment a little bit. When I set it up, for example, to focus on Business Central at the very top, I'm refining the subset of knowledge that it can access. Now, maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe I want to leave it wide open so that way I can use this model as well to ask how to make a chicken pot pie or to look up some information on the web, for example. Well, theoretically, longer term, with the agent definition here, we should be able to go through and then refine whether or not we want it to be able to go to the large language model to ask any question, or if we want to have it act in a different behavior with it, right? And I apologize, I'm getting a little bit of chop, it looks like, inside of here, but we'll go ahead and click on the play for that, and let's see what it comes up with. On our far right here, as we're going through our implementation, you can see that it's basically going through and then adding additional details related to it. So we've got implementation and functional experience, offers insights on how to implement it, answers about the capabilities. It's going to be friendly and collaborative, accurate and helpful. Responses should be truthful and casual, as much factual information as possible. Answer any question as well, as long as it doesn't even pertain to Business Central, right? So this is really cool on the far right here. I know you can't see my mouse. It's keeping track then of all that detail that's basically occurring right there, right, as we go through it. So what I can do now is it says next, let's determine any data sources for the agent. Oh gosh, yeah, I've got a fantastic data source for this. If I go to www.stoneridgesoftware.com/blog, let's check this out. Do we have a blog? I think we have a blog. Yep, right, Carly? We got a blog. Let's go ahead and go on the create here. Yes, please include our blog, blah, in the knowledge results. Let's go ahead and click on play to that, and let's see what happens. All right, it looks like confirm your organization owns the website which will be used to enable Bing search results. We own it, right? I hope so. Let's confirm, right, on the far right over here. So you can see here the data source has been added, and I could add additional data sources. And remember, I'm just using Copilot to create an agent that will be running Copilot, right? So there's going to be additional setup and configuration that we can do as well that we'll go through as we do this. But you can see here the data source has been added successfully. Do I have any further refinements? I do not. So what I could do is I could say, nope, good to go, right? So we'll see what it says, and it probably is going to say, yep, you're good to go. Go ahead and move forward with it. Have a great day. All right, fantastic. Let's go ahead and click on this magical blue button at the top here that is create, and let's go ahead and set up and create our agent. Now, this is an example very quickly of an agent being stood up that we're going to use now in a little bit. But one of the other things I wanted to share is even though we're doing this inside of Copilot Studio, you have the ability as well to set up agents even in Microsoft 365. I want to show that just really quickly too, because it really shows the power then of Copilot Studio and where it's going to be then when it comes to our entire application stack. So just as an example here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a new browser because I want to log in not with my pre-sales login, but with my Stoneridge corporate login. And I'm going to go to Microsoft 365 real quick here, and I'm going to open up the chat, the biz chat as we call it in the M365 space right now. I'm going to hope my phone is next to me, and it is. And what we should see is that we have this wonderful chat pop up, which is going to be Copilot that's inside of here. Well, guess what I can do here? Top right, Create Agent. Click on Create Agent. Look at that. Copilot Studio, front and center here, inside of Microsoft 365. I could go through the exact same steps that I went through for my agent setup to create then, if I view all agents as an example, here are two different examples that I have that I've gone through and set up just to show in demo. I'm going to open one of them up just to kind of show it. But here's an example then of me walking through that stuff in Microsoft 365, clicking on that Create Agent action. And then from here, what we can see is we have a Business Central assistant that we can answer questions around. Now, the cool thing about that is that you can then make it so that in your Copilot icon, that's typically on the bottom of your start icon, or if you go to Microsoft365.com because you have Copilot from Microsoft 365, well, you can use that without even having technically a Business Central license, right? You can basically buy then Copilot for Microsoft 365 and then start using these agents, and you could create a Business Central assistant to help you with that. And what was really cool about this is that when I did it through here inside of Copilot Studio, it actually put these pre-prompts inside of here for me to access without me having to define those. So how do I get started with Business Central as an example? And what it will do is it will actually go through and then take that command or that prompt as we call it, and then basically get our results for it. And again, my wonderful mug is in the way, so I'm going to go ahead and move myself just really quickly back over to here is what we'll do. And what you should be able to see now eventually is that we will have a response then with this. Now, mind you, this is demo, right? We are in a demo environment, which is why we have some of these speed scenarios with it. And once again, the error came in here, right? Go ahead, copy, paste, do it again. Let's see if we can get a prompt that will actually go through. Just know that these are going to be some of the things that you're going to have to just kind of think through and understand that even programmatically, just like we have within programming, when we have a fault that occurs, we could have faults that occur inside of our large language model that we need to figure out how to reprompt or reprocess potentially, right? We do that already in code in ProDev as a part of it, right? So either way, this is an example then of using basically an agent in M365 that is then using Copilot Studio to really go through and then drive that, right? So you can see here then in Copilot Studio, we have our agent that is here. And the cool thing about this now is we can start using this agent, right? So one of the very first things maybe we want to ask is going to be, for example, how do I implement Business Central, right? Let's start with a very basic question to see what happens here. Now, the advantage of doing it inside of Copilot Studio is that there's a lot of other settings that you can enable or disable to expand basically on the repository of knowledge, background, or detail that's really needed then to go through and then drive, for example, that Copilot agent inside of here. And autonomous agents are basically then agents that you don't have to interact with, that you can set, for example, an event like in Power Automate that then do the same thing an agent does, but autonomously, right? And that's the big feature that's coming out that I'm really excited for, because I would say candidly, we do that. We can do that now because we can actually create, for example, a Power Automate that's based off of an event or a trigger, bring up a large language model and do an inquiry against it, and then bring that back, and we can use Copilot Studio even to do that processing as well. The major difference with this, though, with the autonomous agents, is that they're making it so that inside of Copilot Studio, you can define then what those steps are so that an end user doesn't have to know Power Automate to then make it autonomous to be able to do those particular actions, right? So that's one of the big advantages then of the autonomous agents that I have seen. But at the same point, like I said, now from a end user capability perspective, if you wanted to create an autonomous agent through a Power Automate, you could technically do that. We're just abstracting that even higher, so that way in Copilot Studio, we can use Studio then to do this, as opposed to using multiple tools or living in Power Automate to tackle that. So here's an interesting thing, right? So implementing requires planning, requirement analysis, design, migration, dev, training, go live prep, support, and CI. I don't know. If I've never ever implemented a system before, this is pretty accurate. We got to define our critical success factors. We have to assemble a team that's going to be used with our subject matter experts. So, some of the things that you can do here then to help you become more educated then in the implementation process by using an agent as an example would be then to what are the objectives that I should be looking at? Can you give me some examples for companies that manufacture using Business Central, right? So this is where, once again, you could do this with ChatGPT, right? Instead of using an agent to do all of this, you could go to ChatGPT and ask the same type of questions and get a very similar response around it. Now, what's interesting about this, as you can see, as I kind of go a little bit deeper into this, streamline operations, automating processes, right? So these are some objectives. The argument I would have with this team, candidly, would be if you're implementing, you kind of know your objectives for it, right? So you may not be asking questions like that, but you may be asking, for example, create what would a requirement list look like that I could use to match up capabilities in Business Central to requirements, right? So maybe you want to get a list of requirements for, let's be really specific, for accounts payable, right? So we're going through and testing and doing our requirement list or test cases potentially that relate to AP, right? And once again, because we focus this particular agent around the Business Central repository, hopefully what we're going to see here is going to be then some of those different types of scenarios that AP needs to go through and tackle. So vendor management, the master data, the classification of that data, how to do invoices and matching and recurring. Those are going to be obviously some setups and tests that we're going to want to do. Our payment methods, our payment scheduling, our batch payments. Like, if you think about it, you could go through your AP process that you probably already know and then use this really to validate that requirements list that you have to then use that detail, obviously, as part of that process. So once again, just showing some examples here of using an agent to get to that detail. Now, what's cool about these agents is that you can take them and you can embed them in many different areas. One of the examples I want to give here is that you could add additional knowledge repositories. So if I click on my add knowledge here as an example, I could add a SharePoint site that we have that has a ton of data inside of it, or I could connect it into Dataverse as an example. And what's really cool about that is that I could actually then basically reflect or interact then with different types of records that are inside of the system. So I could have my accounts, for example, that are also then related to this particular data or agent that I'm interacting with, right? So what's really amazing about this just is the fact that I can now take this data, embed it, and actually have it then used inside of, obviously, this particular agent. So if you have data that you want to ask about, for example, or maybe you're connecting it to a different system to say, hey, I've done this, is this going to impact this? Well, you could potentially use that to then add those knowledge sources to add more pertinent information about this particular subject as well. Now, some of the other things here, actually, I had a good question that came in here, Clyde. How do we train the agent to approximate between user types like BC and B.C or BC? Some agents might be engaged by voice, right? That's a fantastic question, Clyde. So this gets into that agent setup, right? So as part of the agent, remember, you can always go back to the agent and then go to the settings and then even go through and then change or modify this agent even further, right? So right now I'm actually on, for example, the main page that shows what this agent detail is about. But what I could do inside of here is like, let's say that Business Central, we had that pre-processing that we added to that agent. Let's say, for example, that we wanted to add that capability, or we wanted to add, for example, that additional detail, right? And we can see it does have a string length here, which is kind of interesting, and it did truncate it. It didn't inform me. Microsoft, please inform. But anyways, we can see here that I can always get back to my settings and I can make those changes. Now, one way to potentially tackle this, by using Copilot Studio, we can use the generative capabilities here, which are really awesome. But what we can also do is we can do what are called topics inside of here. And topics then allow for us to path basically some of the content then to then address a particular need, because maybe it enters into this area where we do want it to do something. So as an example with this, if I wanted to add a topic, I could create a new topic with a description. I could name my topic and say this is going to be connects to Dataverse accounts to get the account list, right? And I want to let a user look up the account information regarding an account, right, as a part of this. And so what I can do is I can click on the create action from it, and what Copilot does is it takes that and then generates basically that particular trigger, that frame, that phrase as we call it, and you can see here that it went through and then generated basically that detail, right? So the trigger is a phrase. It built out these phrases to me: connect to Dataverse, get account lists from Dataverse, fetch accounts from Dataverse, retrieve Dataverse, lots and lots of Dataverse, right? So anytime that we're talking about accounts inside of here, what's going to happen is it's going to follow then this path as we go through it. So I'm just going to save it as an example here to kind of start. And then what we can do is we can test it with our agent, right? So some of the things that you can do in here as well, team, you can actually come in here. You can, for your agent as an example, as I'm clicking on stuff, I can track in between topics. I can enable debugging right for it. So maybe I need our account list, right? So it's not exactly that same phrase. And you can see here that in this situation, what it's doing is it's going through and it's answering the question from the perspective of not touching that topic path, right? And this is where it gets really interesting, right? So as an example here now, maybe what I want to do, I want the account list from Dataverse, right? So this would be then, Clyde, kind of like we were talking about on chat here, that you would possibly have different types of triggers that you would program inside of it to help with that pathing. So that way, if you typed in, if somebody said BC, it, maybe the, voice to text says BESEE, like you said in chat per se. Well, you could handle that then by using these triggers to then do pathing that relates to it to then guide it to the right area. Now, one of the final things I just want to kind of show here then inside of Copilot Studio is the fact that you can enable additional features such as the generative AI-based capability that can be enabled then for a particular agent. And just to kind of show that from a settings perspective on this generative AI, what I can do is I can use then this to basically help it respond with the best combination of actions, topics, and knowledge. And I'm going to save that because this actually does transform the agent into really a more generative agent. And what I mean by that, if we go back to even our examples here and we look up our topics as an example, we can see all of a sudden there's a ton more topics that come into here, right? And if I look at my topic now, such as my question that was answered, instead of me defining the phrase list that occurs with it, I'm describing what I want the topic to do, right? And then from there, using prompts, it's going to figure out what path to go down. So let's try that same thing again, and let's go ahead and ask it and say, I need my account list, right, as a part of it. And let's see where it goes for a trigger with this now, right? Look at that. It triggered based upon the detail that I provided, that to then the generative response, because then I took the prompt I had, sent it to a large language model, sent the list of topics that are available, and then it chose based upon the description of the topic as opposed to the keywords or key phrases that are inside of there, right? So there's so much more than this. Like I could go on forever with this. There are the abilities, for example, now to add actions. And an action, as an example, if I create one, I can make it so that, for example, I can grab the forecast weather for today as an action. And then as I click through this, we'll just take a quick look at it. Basically, I can say, yep, connect to MSN weather as a part of it. Location and units can be actually used as those inputs that are related to it. And then I can get that forecast today for today and then finish that out and then connect that agent inside of here, right? So this action then can be exposed. And what's cool about actions is that they can go beyond then, for example, just the generative capabilities. They can go and actually add or call Power Automate, for example, which can call other systems. But you can see here that I added the forecast detail. So let's try it, right? So what is the forecast for today, right? Let's see what it does. Is it smart enough to figure out what that is, right? So what location? Let's do Forest Lake, Minnesota is what we'll do for it, right? And then what would you like, imperial or metric? So you can see it's filling this out on our action. We'll do imperial because I don't know why we don't use metric in the States here. But anyways, I need additional permissions. This is kind of cool, right? So we can see our connections that are inside of here. I can go ahead and then connect this, right? We can choose what our connection is going to be, create or pick it, which should allow me to create it for MSN weather. We should get that connection inside of here. So now it's connected. Now we can go ahead and retry. And we can see here then whether or not this works. And there it is. The weather forecast for Forest Lake will be 49 and 33 at night. So the reason I'm showing this is not just to say like how to use it for an implementation perspective. Like let's go a little bit further with that, right? So an example might be, let's go to M365. So www Microsoft 365, and let's go to our chat again. Let's be more specific, right? I like to make it so that everyone can see what we can and cannot do here, right? Because this is where you're possibly going to use it. If I go ahead and get logged in here, just really quickly, there's my auth request that finally popped up. We'll go ahead and put in our auth requirement. There we go. And let's show another example. So I'm going to go into my agents I have inside of here. So what we'll do is we'll look at our agents that we have. So we'll create agent, and I'm actually going to go to an existing agent that we have. We'll do our Business Central support that's inside of here. So an example might be what fields should I make sure to populate on the customer record so that I can post, let's do a receivable balance to that customer, right? That might be something that would be a little bit more pertinent here, right, in terms of what would be there. So name, number, so we know that the number is going to be there. The address details would be in there as well. The credit limit, yeah, we can define that or not. Currency code, posting groups, there we go. So what are posting groups, right? Right? As an example inside of here. And then what we can see here is that posting groups go through and then specify really where that detail is posting to. So general posting groups are defined to basically interact with the customer or vendor, and they basically drive where that posting is going to go at the general ledger, right? So this is information gathering as you're going through your implementation experience that you can use. Now, other things that you can go further with would be create a table that is a list of customers that are examples that I can use for import as an example, right? So what you could do here is you could actually create data as well inside of these particular systems to basically then go through and then define what you're going to be importing. And here is what is so interesting about this. Like I look at this table right here, and we can see as an example that even the posting group detail, the domestic, which is a really common posting group in the demo data that we have inside of Business Central, is showing inside of here. And what's even more interesting is like Contosto, Fabricam, Litware, some of these are actually inside of different business systems in the dynamic stack. But I was able to create some records here really quickly to be able to basically drive that. Now, here's where it gets even more fun, and we're going to be exploring this even further as we look at some of these generative concepts that are out there. We have it, for example, where I can take a flat file that you provide to me, and I can say, take that file and then turn it into the Business Central format that I need. And what's amazing about it is that even if it has, like in my prompt, I'll say remove all white space characters that are non-visible, tabs, things of that nature inside of the field that could cause, for example, some type of import issue. Well, it does that for me. And I remember opening files and trying to hunt for some of those characters, whereas now I just put it into Copilot Studio or into ChatGPT, tell it to go through and generate that, and it generates it on the fly. And you can then start using this even further. As an example, inside of Copilot, what I could do is make a bunch of vendor example master data items that I can import into Business Central. Put this in a tabular format for me to review, right? So you don't have to create the agent. What you can do is that you can actually use then the full Copilot-based capability to basically go through and then generate or create data, or take that data and then do something with that data. And we can see here are some vendors that it's going through and then generating as a part of it. Remember, what I can also do with a lot of these concepts is also use some of the newer components, like edit in pages, which allows me to create basically a loop structure inside of here. And then this loop, for example, I could take and then export to Excel. So that way then I have an Excel file that I can interact with and use as well as a part of this. So you'll see as it goes through and generates it, it blocked the pop-up here that I had. So I'll go ahead and allow all pop-ups with it. And we'll try it one more time just to kind of show that. But this is then going to allow me basically to take that data and export it. So you can use these, you can attach files to this as an example. You can basically, like when our consulting team comes up to you and says, hey, Scott, or whoever, you got to provide me with master data, right? Well, what you can do is you can say, all right, I'm going to export it from this system. I'm going to use Copilot. I'm going to attach that file. I'm going to say, here's the file that the consultant gave to me that's going to be the format that I need. Can you convert that into that format and then provide that in a tabular format? And it will do it for you. And I guarantee it's going to be faster than what you can probably do with it as well. Now, mind you, verify the accuracy, check it out to make sure everything's okay, but the net result is that you can use then Copilot or technically any large language model now to go through and do a lot of that busy work for you to be faster. And that's kind of the last message I want to leave with you today is the fact that, as you can see here, you can go a lot faster in importing, manipulating data, and asking questions, and identifying an implementation process. You could have it build out test cases for you. You could have it build out, for example, a training plan or a testing plan that you should follow if you're using these basic features and functions. And the power of the prompt is really what you need to focus on to make sure then that you're getting the accurate information that you need to really accomplish the role or job inside of your organization. So hopefully this helped a little bit in terms of, like, unearthing at least a little bit here on what those capabilities are, right? But once again, using Copilot right now to help you go faster is a reality. And here's the thing about it. And let's break through it all. $30 a month. $30 a month. Do you think that, like, I saved $30 when we went from an 8-hour RFP to a half an hour RFP? Take that, scale it. Let's say you've got a sales organization that has that. All of a sudden now you saved 10 people an hour a day, 10 hours a day, right? 1,000 hours every 100 days, right? That's what you need to start thinking about, right? Is how can I go faster with this, because that is the reality that we're starting to see. People are doing more with less, and they're doing more with less by using automation to address a lot of the core things that they're doing to cut down on those costs. And at the same point, then they're basically using those technologies to assist, obviously, with that automation inside of their environment. So with that, thank you all for another wonderful Stoneridge Confab. I hope you learned something out of this. I know on the leadership meeting that we had, everyone loved to go through these concepts. Obviously, we're going to have more conversation coming into 2025 here with autonomous agents. We're going to have some features that we're going to be highlighting inside of Business Central. I wanted to get to it today, but we won't have time, that show, for example, even taking these copilots now. And the next step is, why am I using Microsoft 365? Why don't I just do it inside of Business Central, right? Or you can say, here's my customer list that I'm using from a conversion, import these customers into Business Central, right? So these are some of the concepts that we're starting to look at here at Stoneridge, and we're really excited to share it with you, because quite candidly, they are making it faster and better and easier for us to show and to use the capabilities, obviously, of the Microsoft Dynamics platform and all the other solutions as well. All right, so with that, thank you all. We're a couple minutes over. Have a great rest of your week, and make sure to be on the lookout. We'll post our next Confab topic coming up, because we've got quite a bit more that we've got to tackle. And then obviously 2025 is coming up here pretty soon, so we are going to have a review of our predictions for 2024 to see how accurate we were. And then we will be setting the tone for what is 2025. And I'm pretty sure we're going to have some fun conversation around that as well. So thank you again, everyone, for joining. Have a great rest of your week, and we will see you again on Confab 2 weeks from now. Thank you much. Bye.